Here's a new lens to me, the Leica 28mm Elmarit f2.8. I'll go over why I purchased this, do a quick unboxing, and show some sample photos on the M11. I'll compare the 28mm focal length to the 50mm and talk about why I think a 28mm is a great complement to a 50mm lens. This one I purchased pre-owned, and I bought the previous version. I think buying pre-owned lenses is the way to go. In this case, I saved on depreciation cost, and I saved some money by buying the previous version. It helps to buy from an established, reputable store because in most cases they give an accurate description of the product. They test it out to make sure it's working as it should, and oftentimes they also send it in for a CLA. And in this case, even though it was used, it came with everything and the packaging looked perfect. This shows that the previous owner probably took good care of the lens since he cared enough to take care of the boxes and all the paperwork that came with it. And the lens body itself is in perfect condition. I don't see any scratches or dents, and it has that same expected Leica build quality. And after taking off the lens cap and the hood, it's a very small, compact lens. It feels lightweight, but it also feels solid at the same time. The aperture rings are crisp, and the focus ring also has a nice movement. And there's a focus tab also, which is helpful. Overall, the movements of the focus ring and the aperture ring feel pretty much similar to my 50mm Summilux. I do wish the aperture rings were just a little bit tighter. But this lens being a previous version, it came with a plastic lens hood and a plastic lens cap. The lens hood is snap-on instead of screw-on. The current version 28mm does have a metal hood which screws on, but that's not compatible with this lens. I don't really like anything about this plastic lens hood, so I just took it off and used it without the hood. There is a metal lens cap included in the bottom of the package, which I'm using as a protection for the front element. My lens came with an included UV filter, and the metal lens cap has a slightly tight fit with that filter on. It does work, but it's a little bit better fit if I take the filter off. Here's a size comparison with the 35mm Summicron f2.0, and they're actually pretty similar in size. I was expecting the 28mm to be a lot smaller, but it is a little bit lighter than the 35mm. They both have that same squared off lens hood, but the 35mm has a metal lens hood and the 28 has that plastic snap-on hood. So I took off both of the lens hoods to give a better comparison of the size, and I'll also take off the lens cap in the back. And here again you can see that they're actually overall pretty similar in size. And again, the 28 is lighter weight than the 35. Comparing the 28 to the 50mm, it's a much bigger difference, and you can definitely notice the difference in both the size and the weight when you're carrying around both of these lenses. The 50mm has that collapsible lens hood, which is a nice feature, and it has that snap-on lens cap. And an even much bigger difference between the 28 and the 75 millimeter. The 75 millimeter is even heavier than the 50 and even larger. So what I like about the small size of the 28 is I can have the 50 millimeter on the camera body most of the time and shoot most of my photos with that. And I can have the 28 in a small bag or even a pocket and pull it out when I need some extra wide shots. The 28 millimeter Elmarit is a great match for the M11. It looks great on the camera body and it still functions perfectly on the M11. Even though it's an f2.8 and it's not a super fast lens, the benefit is they're able to construct it in a compact and lightweight form factor. If you compare this to a 28 millimeter M Summilux, that would be a much larger and heavier lens. The Summilux would work better in low light situations, but the M11 compensates for this because it's a good low light camera. It has a full frame sensor and it's backside illuminated, and I can reduce the resolution in camera, and I can bring the ISO down to 64. So it is usable in low light situations, but I got this mainly to complement my 50 millimeter Summilux, which I can use that for low light situations. And I'm using the 28 Elmarit mostly for street photography and outdoor shots. And with the lens hood off, it's even more compact and not intimidating at all for snapping street photography shots. So as a two lens kit, I think the 28 and 50 combination is a great option. I still prefer using the 50 millimeter as my primary lens, but as I learned when I went to New York with only my 50 millimeter lens, I did miss out on some wider shots, which a 28 millimeter would have been helpful to have for those few occasions. So if I'm going into a situation where I don't know exactly what I'll be shooting, having that extra option of a wider 28 millimeter lens is a great backup. I do still have the Q2 with its excellent 28 millimeter Summilux lens. So that goes as wide as f1.7. So why would I get this f2.8 M lens? And is it worth it to have both of these 28 millimeter lenses? So if I'm taking out my M camera, I'd rather not bring an extra body just to get that 28 millimeter field of view. So I can just bring along the smaller, compact, lightweight 28 millimeter M lens and just have that in my pocket to take out as needed. I can use the 50 millimeter Summilux for low light and for portraits. I can use the 28 for street photography and architecture during the day, and I can use it stop down to f8 and put the focus tab at infinity and get off some quick shots without worrying about precise focusing. Here's some sample photos all done with the 28 millimeter lens, and it's still an extremely sharp lens, but the 28 millimeter focal length allowed me to get in more into the shot, and a lot of these shots I wouldn't be able to get with the 50 because sometimes I don't have enough room to back up all the way. There is some spatial distortion with the 28 millimeter, but I wouldn't say it was extreme, and it doesn't distract from the image. Here's a direct comparison with the 28 and 50 field of view. So this is the 28 millimeter. So this sets the scene and lets you know what's going on in a larger portion of the scene. And then standing in the same spot is on the 50 millimeter. It focuses in more closely on the center subject. So I'll do another point of view. So here's the 28 giving you the larger scene. And then when I switch to the 50 on the same spot, it comes in closer to the center subject. And here I shot with the 28 through a closed gate, and I wouldn't have been able to take in all of this with a 50 millimeter lens. And here's a close-up with a 28 millimeter lens. I wouldn't say it's a great portrait lens, but it is doable if that's the only lens you have. So my conclusion so far is that this 28 millimeter Elmarit is a very sharp lens. It's very compact and lightweight, but it does have some drawbacks, being at f2.8. It doesn't have that shallow depth of field, and it doesn't have that low light capability. But I'm using mine in a very specific use case. I use it as a complement to my 50 millimeter Summilux, which does have that portrait ability and a shallow depth of field. And I can use this 28 at f8 and infinity focusing for those quick street photography shots. It doesn't take the place of my 28 millimeter Summilux on the Q2, so I can still have that to use if I know that I'm going to be out shooting just mainly wide angle shots. So I did save some money with getting this lens used and getting the previous version, but I do realize that there's less expensive lenses from other brands, but I enjoy staying with the Leica brand and having all Leica lenses on my M11 body. Let me know in the comments whether you also have this lens, or would you rather have the 28 Summicron or the 28 Summilux. Thanks for watching.